And again? Well, you almost did it then, didn't you?
I can't fly.
One day a city fox braved the edges of the petrol station. Jean saw him first, in a quiet moment. He returned the next day, perhaps because his first had been so quiet. She named him Basil. She told her regulars. They fed him. The fox became a regular too. The cycle was established. People talked. People, all sorts of people, shared their particular story about the city fox who came to be fed at the petrol station. People, all sorts of people, came to the petrol station in the hope of seeing the fox or feeding him. Sometimes they did. He disappeared abruptly, presumed dead, and still they talked. Even more so, truth be told. After all, the space needs to be filled. Beyond the stories, he left his lesson, which is simply this: it takes only one city fox to create a community, or just something else.
So Chris, out of all the things in nature, why the city fox specifically?
First of all, I needed an example of nature in the city that was big and obvious. Secondly, I needed that representative to be one that provoked different responses from people. Some people will put food out in their back gardens to encourage the city fox in at night and think it's beautiful and cute, and some people will think it's vermin. And if you go outside the city, of course, some people think the fox is fair game for sport, and other people find that hugely offensive. And thirdly, it had to be a city fox because it's big enough to be noticed. It wouldn't have worked if I'd chosen a city ant. You know, it just wouldn't have been the same. It might have worked, but it would have taken us in different directions. You know, one day an ant braved the edges of the petrol station. It doesn't have the same ring to it, really. You know, and Jean needs a super telescope to have seen him first.
And the fox actually is real.
And the fox actually, yeah, absolutely right. Basil the fox braved the edges of the petrol station in the 1990s in Mapperley, Nottingham, and did attract a community. That was a completely true story. And it was fascinating. I think that a true story sparked my thoughts about how important it is for us to connect and communicate with other people, and how easy it is to create a community. Network is just another word for association, which in turn is just another word for connection. And connections flow into each other, leaving us compelled to create meaning, which is, it seems, part of our nature. Whether that is the so-called nature of our own creation, or that which precedes and surrounds us and asks nothing more than we learn how to look. My career teachers, whom I called parent, knew nothing of this. Instead of a net working to connect, combine and create, they saw instead a ladder, steep, with steps beyond the reach of their imagination and therefore of my possibility. And career is just another word for life, or so it seems for many people. And life is just another word for opportunity, which is the result of space and curiosity acknowledged and combined. And that great space cries out for teachers who cast their net towards it, freed from the need for legacy or the well of justification. Teachers with nothing to prove other than their willingness to release and their strength to support. And network is a word we use too often, too small. Because here, right now, in this instant, we are all sharing the world together. This is our time.
And this connectivity and the inevitability of human connections and relationship. This is a theme you visit a lot in your work.
Absolutely. It's a central theme for everything that I write about, I think, in terms of we are not meant to be alone. We are at our best when we have powerful, positive relationships. And, you know, as you say, there's an inevitability about it, purely because it's how we are built. We're built to connect.
Is it possible that there's nothing more important than that?
Breathing is probably the most important thing of everything. And then human relationships, I think, come second. We need to feel known and understood and connected to others, and it's what enriches our life. It's the old cliche thing, isn't it? You know, on your deathbed, if you know you're running out of time, you're not going to mull over the great business deal or the great piece of work. You're going to be reflecting on relationships. You're going to be thinking about what you said and what you did, and, you know, to whom you said it, and what you didn't say or didn't do. Absolutely. I don't know how this happened. Genuinely, I have no idea. This, of all things. I mean, if you ask me, if you ask anyone, we'd all say it doesn't make sense, given the great churn of possibility, the random turning of thought and skin, the endless shift of inside and out. Let's be honest, the odds were stacked against. So high, I'm amazed they didn't come tumbling down and cover everything. I do accept things must happen in a dream, at a concert or the beach, sometimes on a Wednesday. But when the odds are truly stacked against, that's proof of the pointlessness of planning or the need to hope. It's the reason to believe in God or gamble big into the darkness. And yet, despite the odds, we met, talked, and became friends. Incredible, isn't it? Proof of something. We know that we're wired to think. We know that we're wired to think about our interactions with other people. We know that's a natural process. In a sense, it's learning to step away from the thoughts and recognize that they happen and they're not me. That's the distance that we're looking to create essentially when we're talking about, you know, getting distance from self, is if we recognize that, in a sense, thoughts, like everything else that I can think of at the moment, tend to exist in something or on something. So we're in a theatre, we're sat on chairs, the chairs are on a floor, the floor is on the foundations of the building is on the earth is in a solar system, the solar system is in a galaxy. Things are in or on something.
And all of a sudden we can feel all of that because
we're now there
bringing it into being.
and talking about it. So thoughts, what are they in or on? Funny things, thoughts. They change as we do, or we change as they do. Or perhaps it's a bit of both. To be honest, I'm not really sure. I do know I have a certain relationship with my thoughts. We do clearly relate. We do influence each other. It's a relationship that has lasted for as long as I can remember. We grew up together, my thoughts and me, walking and running and thinking, learning and thinking, looking and thinking, listening and thinking. Sometimes too busy thinking to look, listen or learn. Time for myself still means time to be alone with my thoughts. A well-established, ever-expanding room. A bar with light and shade, murmur and mayhem, owned yet never quite controlled by me. Filled with necessary, interesting, unexpected and sometimes unwelcome characters. The loudest relive the past, my past, in ways that justify their existence, imagining my future according to their need. Others appear harmless. I fall for their familiarity and let them build a debt without challenge. Some sit in the shadows, present without ever fully drawing my attention. A few visit only once, never to return. Sometimes they have such presence, a promise left unsaid. I wish I had engaged them more. There is a space, too, beyond the bar. Occasionally I sense the entrance and the silence within, and then my thoughts clamour, objecting to my momentary disregard, calling for my service, creating the doubts and questions that serve them best. We have a certain relationship, my thoughts and me, and for all its ups and downs, for all the noise, dark corners and missed opportunities, it's quite okay, I think. And you touched on the idea of, you know, you said, can you perceive yourself and ask, who am I? And I think that's an interesting question, because I think it's also a dangerous starting point to say, who am I? I think if you can create distance from self, the first question is, how am I? Brackets, processing and operating right now, not who am I? There's a danger of the sense of identity, of this is who I am. You know, again, go back to the fox. The fox isn't going, who am I? And, oh, I'm a fox. Like, do you know what? I'm probably the only fox that's got people trained at a petrol station in the country. I should have my own television programme. And then, of course, they look on the TV and go, oh my God, there is one, but the man's got his hand up its bottom. Do you know, or whatever, for people who can go back that far with the TV references. Nature doesn't go around, spend its time thinking, who am I? Of course, nature doesn't think, as far as we know. We're the only animal, as far as we can tell, that can go meta to our own thoughts and our own emotions. In other words, we can have thoughts about our thoughts. And then we can have emotions about our emotions. So I can feel sad that that person glared at me in that way, because I think that means they don't like me, and so on and so forth. And then I can get angry at myself for being sad. And as far as we know, no other animal species is so messed up that it can do that. I have made a business of my life, played my part in creating a city of expectation, although I show my weakness often by claiming it the work of others. I could have learned from the city fox, comfortable in the shadows, from the branch, bending gladly this way and that, from the spaniel, forgetful and joyous. I could have blessed the flower for offering its delicate face full to the heavens. I could have found release in loss, swapped every agenda for just a little more awareness. I could have been led by the seasons and not by the clock, thought less about winning and more about service. I could have, only I was too busy making a business of my life, and now I fear it is too late. I am so much the creation of my own habits. Although, wait, I hear the city fox whispering, "Human, listen, there is always time for rebirth. This alone is nature's business. The universe is all around you, always. You are still small enough to grow." And I believe her. I have to. My hope, the city fox.
So how do we even know whether we're living our own lives, given the pressures we feel externally?
We need to, if we're going to enable and encourage people to go into all the space that's available to them in any direction they want, we first of all have to have the confidence and the power and the ability to stretch our imaginations on their behalf and then teach them to do the same. And of course in formal education, as in other aspects of society, there are pressures created by other people to say this is where you should focus your attention. So in education, fairly obviously, school teachers are required to focus on examination passes and measurements that determine whether the school is successful or not. So we haven't got too much time, say, for some of the things that we're talking about. We don't have time to do, let's do classes on how to manage beliefs and understand that they're not real. And you can keep them, change them, adapt them, develop new ones. They're yours to control. Where are the classes in that? And the answer is, of course, well, then there isn't. Now, obviously, we don't do classes in how to communicate and influence well and the power of that. They're all sort of, at best, they happen accidentally. And this isn't me being critical of teachers, because I think teachers, you know, are people who are committed to the education of others, are by and large wonderful human beings. But they are affected by the agendas of other people. So that squeezes down onto the student experience. And of course, parents and families and communities are being told, because of those agendas, at least subliminally, these are the things that matter. These are the things you have to achieve. And so, you know, what does society need us to produce from education? Well, it needs a raft of different people with different skills so society can work. Of course it does. I'm not arguing with that. It makes sense. But it also means that if we're not careful, we lose the opportunity to make people realise that they can and they do have the right to achieve whatever it is that most turns them on. Max doesn't like pasta. He says this, red-cheeked and serious, talking to the food first, as if it can understand, as if it needs to know, is somehow capable of transformation. He says this, shaking his head solemnly, the way his mother does when she tells him no. Max doesn't like pasta, at least at this table. He has every time before, as far as anyone could tell. Today something has changed, and it isn't the cooking. Today, with a frown and a flush, with tomato sauce clumped around his lips and a fork dropped deliberately into his bowl, Max has marked his difference, made the first shift towards the confusion of identity. One day he will stop talking to food as if it can hear. He will stop bringing toys to life, being transfixed by a passing bus, jigging on the spot with uncontrollable excitement. The door will close gradually on his openness to surprise. Education and expectation will press him to fill his moments rather than live them, to greet others politely, laugh with restraint. Max will be taught how to fit in, squeezed into qualifications, filtered through experience, shaped more by the needs of others than the food he eats. For some time now, society, the great conformist snake, has been sneaking into his life, applying its pressure. It will become less subtle. Learning through play, movement and modelling will be replaced by the race to raise hands into the air. Laughter turning quickly into tears and quickly back again, slaughtered in favour of seriousness. He will be taught to fear mistakes and about the absolute need above all things to know. Encouraged towards an apprenticeship or a graduate job, a path shaped by the agendas and rewards of others, he will be distanced from his birth gift and truly blessed if those close to him link arms and brace themselves on his behalf against the pressure, standing firm, giving him the time and space he needs to seek his passion, the courage to find his own way. Today, Max doesn't like pasta. I pray when he's 50, he loves his life. So we can learn to not join in with thoughts, to just watch thoughts, to sometimes stop thinking, to not create internal narratives that are so restrictive and damaging that they limit our ability to enjoy being alive and doing, you know, we've got as much space, I think, as we ever need to do whatever we want to in our lives. Sometimes people put boundaries in the way and blockages, but we're the most adaptive species on the planet. And there are always people, if we know how to find them, who will work with us to help us in whatever regard, formally or informally. So there's always scope, I believe, for that. Where do you want to move to? What do you want to do? There's always space. We won't get that space, we won't recognise the space, we won't develop the abilities to move into and through that space if we don't learn to do some internal management as well as, you know, external management in terms of how we relate. The house had been demolished. Now, in the surprisingly small rectangle of earth amid the sparse patches of grass, human remains litter the footprint of a home. A plastic bottle, several bricks, pages from a free paper, shards of glass, some half buried, pointing heavenward as if planted in some unfathomable design. A used condom, I think. It is dark, I don't investigate too closely. A single training shoe, an empty packet of cigarettes. These are the things I notice, all muddied or in shadow or a combination of the two. It's hard to tell as tears blur my vision and the moon hides its gift beyond the ceiling of cloud. Who would have thought that this garden of all things could... I have to get past me to get to you. That's the truth, hidden behind the need for right and wrong, for learning facts and proving points, for making a career and establishing a reputation, dividing and classifying, growing the eye of isolation perfectly. Now at least I know that I have to get past me to get to you. Because I am always there, wherever I turn, the gatekeeper, cloaked in intellect and thought, self-interest and fear, separate no matter how close we seem. I am always there, wherever I turn, filling space with words and thought, the blinkers of expectation reflecting ever inwards. Weakness is my only hope, the challenge to all I have created. It isn't love, lust, or desire that will get me to you. It is submission, reduction, the most holy defeat. I have to get past me to get to you. I have to get past me with a warm smile and a loving arm. I wish I could open my case, take silence out and breathe it gently, unnoticed, into the minds of others. Breathing through eyes and ears, nostrils too, riding the in-breath, sneaking silence as the conscious rattles. I wish silence was mine enough to share, that I could be its willing servant, the carrier from shore to shore. Only I cannot bear silence for any length of time against the current. Not when the horizon threatens, when noise rolls in and crashes, when options dance or success squeezes. I have on occasion stumbled into silence, felt it seeping from the outside in and the inside out, heard the words that grow there, perfect in their form, drawing all together, whilst the rest of me gathered, sure of its loud return, urgent to pour back into the fleeting space. Of all things I believe this: there is silence the most natural home deep within us, too often crushed beneath the noise we create and the need for more, and then with waves crashing we isolate the words of others, colour them with our own dark dangers, hold them to account and fuel the storm we call normality. Truly, I would be the carrier of silence, grateful for the opportunity to share its secret and breathe it to your own, to meet you there, to see your beauty and know your truth in silence.
There's some of the poems are genuinely quite startling. I'm thinking specifically of the poem Who. The event that sparked the beginning of the poem's life was a very organic sort of instantaneous moment.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. My wife had been away in Singapore for a couple of weeks and she was travelling back, and I thought I'd surprise her because I knew she'd got to make a stop off at a London hotel, and I thought, well, I'll be there early in the morning, she won't expect me, and I'll just sit there and greet her when she steps into the hotel reception. So I arrived the night before and, I found the chair that I wanted, and I was up an hour or so before she was allowed, expected to arrive in the taxi from the airport. And I did that great counting down thing, that wonderful selfish thing where you've got a great surprise for somebody else and they can't possibly enjoy it more than you're going to. So it's as much about you as it is ever about them, and I had a wonderful hour just counting down and watching the passing show and watching the doorman and the concierge and then of course eventually a taxi pulled up and I could see that it was my wife Mary in the back of the cab, and I watched her come out. And she's got the two big cases and she's walking through and they open the doors for her and greet her. And of course she doesn't see me because I'm not there to be seen yet. I want to let her walk over there and then shout something out across the whole thing so everybody stops and looks. And they see her stop and look at me, and then if all goes well, she starts crying, I start crying, everybody goes, oh, isn't this lovely? And we make a bit of a scene of it and have a lovely time. So in she came, she's walking, I'm watching, she doesn't see me. And the idea of going, hey, welcome home, goes completely out of my head. Because for the first time and the only time in my life, I'm watching the person that I live with on her own, without me, without any of her children, without any of her friends. And inevitably, that experience, which took my breath away, put a question in my mind that had to be answered. I sleep so well with you beside me because I know you better than anyone else on earth. This is my comfort through life's changes. It seems to me, and there's the risk, that to know someone so well and be known in return is one of the great treasures we all seek, a need crossing boundary and border, the place where lost and found and lost again spiral ever inward until the point of difference is so diminished and so disguised it seems to disappear. And yet I know you in the only way I can, from the living place behind my eyes, eyes with their own blind spot, relying on their significant other to help me navigate my way. Perhaps we have worked together in silent agreement to construct this life within a narrow row of understanding. A street lined with buildings that function as walls, keeping us in whenever we're together, adding their shadow to our own, limiting our vision. Perhaps our love-trained eyes see each other so well within the confines of all we have created, we miss the movement in the shadow, the otherness beyond the knowing. This morning I sat waiting for your return. One simple word, syllables ocean deep, teeming with time apart, comfortable within its basic construct, whilst I, for all my magnificent design, struggle to contain anticipation and the swirling, swelling pride of a well-planned surprise. I knew you wouldn't see me there, ensconced in the burgundy armchair, leather-worn, experienced as an old man lined by every trick and change, tucked away in the corner of the grand hotel reception. Sitting there, counting down the minutes, watching the street through large glass doors, watching the men with close-cropped hair and attentive eyes greeting arrivals with at least half a smile, as if this was fair exchange for what they used to do. I knew you wouldn't see me there. Just one more stop on your journey home, no expectation now of recognition or reunion. Only you, forever the great teacher, forged a lesson as you always do. The present from your travels, inescapable as the new day and mine only. A broadening of that narrow row, too much between us for even men in coats to recognise. It began before you left the taxi. Something different in your profile and your gesture. Clear despite the half shadow. Clearer still as you stepped out, comfortable with the crammed cases tracking at your heel like well-trained dogs. I couldn't have known, was not prepared for, what the chair must have witnessed so many times with so many others, just one of its well-kept secrets. This was you alone. You I had never seen before, you without me. Making your way clear-eyed despite the travel, you in your own shining space, you, the protector of my sleep. Easy then, as I watched you walking without requirement, freed from the need to show your love for anyone but yourself. Easy then to welcome the new question, beacon bright, filled with wonder. Who are you, my love, when I'm not there? Who? I realised that I'd started writing poetry when I was 9. My father had passed away. My mother passed away a couple of years later. I'd sold the family home. I'd cleared out all the things that needed to be given to relatives or I wanted to keep. There was an old single wardrobe and I hadn't looked on top of the wardrobe, and I don't know why, but as I was going around the house I thought, you never checked up there, and I looked up there and there was this tatty, battered old brown leather suitcase, a briefcase. I took it down, and inside there were a whole range of photos of me, black and white photos of me as a kid in the 1950s and early 1960s, and school reports from the 1960s, and those things that parents keep that I didn't know they'd got, that were just there. And there was a notebook, old sort of brown hardback school sort of notebook, exercise book, with black ink pen writing on the cover, my writing. Didn't even realise until that day that for some reason all through my life I've wanted to write in a black ink pen. Didn't even know I'd started doing that, you know, when I was 8 years old, 9 years old. And I'd put a very descriptive title rather than creative title on the front of the book. It said, A Book of Verse by Chris Parker. And I opened it and there was this very nicely handwritten in black ink, obviously, poem called The Owl. And it had the date, the month and the year. I wish I wrote so neatly now. And there were about 12 poems going on for about over the span of about the next 14 months. And with each one, next to the title, I'd put the month and the year. And it was my first, I was writing myself a little poetry book, a little poetry collection back then. And the poetry was lost for a while. But I obviously took the suitcase home with me and kept all the contents and kept that book. So I'd started writing poetry as a sort of 9, 10-year-old, and I have not got the faintest idea why. For one who grew up in the countryside, who was a boy, worked the manor grounds, and for a penny would lay the scent running joyously before the hounds and men on horseback, whip it lean, more heart than head, who grew to work for 30 years or more outside, sometimes sleeping in the field using earth and sky as home. For a man who spent nearly half his span like this, he didn't care too much for gardening. Not that he ever disregarded it. He was too proud to leave anything untended. Rather, he kept things simple. No complex planting, no borders requiring explanation, no demanding designs, choosing instead the bare, easy minimum. A squared lawn, lined on 3 sides by roses, not quite evenly spaced. A simple path, with no clear edge. A corner shed, secure but drab as a mongrel's sodden fur. A grey slab patio, hosed down whenever it was demanded of him. Our garden, not so different from all the rest. Not as bright and shiny as those rare few, but not the worst, he made sure of that. Not as bad as number 17, where one fence panel always needed replacing, and 23, where even the front showed signs of couldn't care less. I never asked him if he was secretly grateful for 17 and 23, or what purpose he thought the garden served, or if it ever reminded him of when he could run forever, or if it ever stirred a union man's anger that money and land always went together, or if he ever expected to end with this particular space. I had no questions about our garden beyond the occasional, "Oh, must I really?" I had no questions about our garden, just as I had no questions about our kitchen or our lounge or that print of the talking dogs. I had no questions about how my parents' life, the frame of mine, had reached this point. If this had always been their plan, if this was it, and if so, why? Our garden stayed that way forever, or so it seemed. If I'd thought at all, I would have thought, this garden, just like Thatcher, isn't for changing. Only I was wrong, just like she was wrong, and it had nothing to do with the seasons. No planetary turn caused this change, nothing to do with our so-called Earth spinning through the heavens, and certainly nothing to do with a change of heart, a sudden desire to create something new, outshine the neighbours. Instead, a build-up and a burst, an everyday crash and collapse, pathways burning, curling inward in the heat. It took some weeks, that slow reveal, late winter weeks, the garden showing no signs of life. When he came home, the routes to mind and mouth were broken. We shared unspeakable detours to previously unknown places. His body, of course, fought back, ferociously so. No hounds and horses now, but still more heart than head. More heart than head. Still needing to move. The spade, brown-handled, rusting, not cleaned since the last time, looked bigger against him than before, as if it had grown in hibernation and knew that he had shrunk, as if it was throwing down a challenge as out of the shed he came, his grim determination fixed on the lawn not yet ready to be cut and never again to be so. We didn't know and didn't ask. Not then, not ever, well, not of him. Instead, we all agreed he's safe in his own garden, our garden. We can keep an eye on him here. At least he can't wander or make a nuisance of himself. Did we really say that? Can't make a nuisance. He needed both hands now, the spade, heavy, carried like a rifle from hip to shoulder. Not a deliberate gesture on his part, no making a point, more bare than that, more stripped right down, maskless now and until the end. Moving forward, one foot dragging slightly, head jutting, threatening always to overbalance. Moving because that is of all things the most basic sign. Moving with enough skin just to contain those blue-grey veins and shining knuckles and beating heart. Enough skin just to keep him in. The thinnest of prison walls, impenetrable nonetheless, a most solitary confinement. No visitor can enter here. No one escapes. Love hurts one way. He stamped down hard, anger his heart's engine, forcing metal into earth. 1, 2, 3, 4 initial cuts, isolating one misshaped piece from all the rest. Then back to the beginning. 1, spade in and under. 2, scoop green top soil. 3, balance briefly on the spade, snorting, staring. 4, return upended into the waiting grave. 5, begin again. No looking back, just stamp and cut time after time. Isolate, remove, return inside out. Just do this thing. Stamp, cut, lift, balance, tip. Just take the lawn and turn it inside out and turn it into something else. Just kill the grass and show the soil. Dare roots to grow in public view. Just cut and turn till there's nothing left. There's nothing left. Did we say that? Took a day for him to turn our lawn inside out. He never tried to turn it back again. He tried instead to talk to us. Only the lawn hadn't freed him, and the lawn didn't help us gain entry. The soil just lay there, secure, but drab as a mongrel sodden fur. And he tried to kill himself. Twice. And people saved him twice. And then eventually there was no saving. The ending came natural as the soil, although it felt less drab. It's not our garden anymore. It doesn't look the same. The borders are more vibrant, the shed is new, the path well-edged, the patio repaved. The lawn is now a luscious green. There's much beneath it. It is absolutely possible to persuade another human being to do something that is in your best interest and not theirs.
Big responsibility.
So it's a huge responsibility. You know, for me, it's almost an even bigger responsibility than something that we sometimes forget as a responsibility, like driving a car. Because I've learnt how to drive, I now have lots of responsibilities when I go out in that car about how I behave, with regard to the people in the car with me and myself, and of course everybody who I'm driving past and next to and behind and so on. And communication's at least as big a responsibility as we talked about earlier. We do influence, whether we mean to or not, we will influence. You know, once we are aware of another human being, whether we recognise it consciously or not, and often we don't, there is a subconscious level.
City Fox wasn't aware that he was...
Yeah, City Fox wasn't aware of the influence, absolutely. City Fox was so busy being, and the influence rippled out and stayed for ages, as we talked about. And we do that. We do that. You know, we can be so busy spending our spare moments thinking about what he said and she said and they didn't know and what do they think and what did it mean, that we can forget. I'm probably in their mind too. If you are responsible for other people and if you are responsible for the planet, you are responsible for the debris that is left behind and or created, as well as you're responsible for all the great stuff. And the aim is to limit the debris, to recognise that that's part of our responsibility, and to manage it as best we can, which is pretty much, I think, all we can do.
Is there room in there anywhere for happy endings?
Is there room in there for happy endings? I think we have so much space. There isn't room for any ending at all. For many years I sought control, which is another way of saying I believed I had the power to create certainty. In my defence, it is a common illness. I wrote and exercised plans, I developed resources, I did everything I could to shape today and tomorrow, which took all of my attention. So I missed the lessons offered to me, the branch dancing this way and that on the wind, the flower's face opening to the heavens, capable only of receiving. The city fox, slinking, sleeping close by, never dreaming of the wild forest, nor missing it. A wise man saw me once in a dream. He said, "Imagine being a circle with a dot at its centre, a dot you can barely see and yet a circle too. Imagine that is yourself." This is how he broke me. There is a light, he said, that can only be lit by weakness. It can light 1,000 others and is never diminished by its giving. It can be a touch, a look, or just a word. Once, as I stood crying, the night sky whispered, "Nature is free from knowing and not knowing, from success and failure." As the circle opened, just a glimmer, I suspect, my thoughts dissolved, all knowledge and questions forgotten, all sense of self lost in that great unknowing. There, in that timeless place, beyond separation, I was the city fox, and all the rest.
I can't fly.
You will, sweetheart. You will.